Hello Mob, thank you for joining us today. It's actually a bit of a treat, and this is something we haven't had the opportunity to do before, but it's something we'd like to do a lot more of, and really quite delighted that the first person we get to have an in-person conversation with is Cindy Blackstock. And Cindy comes to us from Canada. She is one of our sisters from a long way away, and she is also the director of the First Nations Caring Society. That's an incredible organisation which I'm sure a lot of you are really familiar with, and I'm sure a lot of you are really familiar with Cindy's work. So I'm sure the reason you're jumping on today is because you want to hear more from her. So I'm going to stop talking now and introduce Cindy. And Sydney, I'm sure you've come across this before, but here in Australia we always like to ask, who's your mob and where you're from? Would you like to tell us a little bit about that to kick off with?
I'm a member of the Gitxsan First Nation. That means People of the River of the Mist. We're located on the west coast of British Columbia. I work in unceded Algonquin territory, which is in Ottawa, and that's where the Caring Society is located. We have had a very long relationship with SNAICC, and I can just say that it's been just such a benefit to us. We come here and are inspired by the ideas, and then we try to put them into practice. And some of our child engagement stuff is actually inspired by your National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children's Day.
What gets someone like yourself involved in an organisation and says, you know what, the role that our children play is so critically important that I want to stand up right now and I want to make sure they have a future?
Well, the real truth is I was actually a line child protection worker for 15 years. And I really saw that there were more First Nations kids coming into care than everyone else. And I also realized something else, and that was that many of the issues driving those kids into care were beyond the ability of parents to control. It was things like poverty. It was a lack of addictions treatment and to deal with the multi-generational trauma from those residential schools. It was all of that kind of stuff. And I was convinced of two things, Catherine. Number one, somebody had to do something. And number two, not me. I was convinced there had to be and I think this is familiar to many of us, there was somebody else out there. They were smarter, they knew more. My job was to hold down the fort here with my families and working with the community and doing what I can. I put my finger in the dike. And then, I waited a long time, and I looked around left and right and everywhere, and we were all doing that. And it finally came to a point where I went to see a little boy, and he had cerebral palsy, and he was a First Nations child. And his standing frame was held together with duct tape. Now, I had worked off reserve for the provincial system, so I saw what mainstream kids got. And I went to the government, I just put in the proper documentation, and I expected it to be funded. And they said, no. Oh no, he's being funded by the federal government because he's a, quote, Indian child. And he already got a wheelchair 3 years ago, so he's not entitled to another piece of equipment for another couple of years. I was just gobsmacked, right? And I saw this apartheid public service stuff piling up on the hopes and dreams of so many kids. And that's what finally got me to a place of saying, well, I got to do something. And then the next question is, oh my God, I don't know what to do. But there's a great poem I was gifted by my aunt. It's called Faith. And it says, when you step across that place where light leads into darkness, there'll be something solid to stand on, or you'll be taught to fly. And what I realized, my fear of when I was putting my finger in a dike, is that I would be all alone and I would mess up on the other side of that line. But when you get there, you realize that the ancestors had always been there. They had struggled for that moment. And you are now standing in their company and the company of others. And together you're going to find a way forward.
You managed to take on the federal government, is that what you call it in Canada?
Yeah.
The federal government, and say, you've been breaching our rights and our children, you've been putting them at risk. and it is and it's something that our sector and anyone on this line would be really familiar with, is understanding that when federal governments do not invest in the resources and the services that our families require, then we have deficits, and they are structural deficits that we can't overcome ourselves. Talk to us a little bit about that.
We were in that pattern of writing reports documenting that First Nations families were getting far less, and that was resulting in family separation rates that exceeded those of residential schools. We also had children who were dying because of it, to be honest. Children who were denied mental health treatment, dying of suicide. Children denied basic health treatment, dying unnecessarily. And the call from the government was, thank you for the report, we'll fund you for another report. We had a wonderful elder when we created the Caring Society. He said, never fall in love with the Caring Society. Never fall in love with your business card. Only fall in love with the kids, because one day you might have to sacrifice both those things for them. After that second report, between the first report and the second report, the number of First Nations kids going into care rose 71.5% when we're sitting at that table. So we realized that this was the moment where we had to step up to the plate. And in 2007, we partnered with our Assembly of First Nations, the political body in Canada, and we filed this human rights case against the Canadian government, saying what they were doing was racially discriminatory. And they cut our funding within 30 days, and we haven't been government funded since. But the communities really rallied around, and the children rallied around. And this long, winding legal case that produced really nothing but endless motions by Canada for the first number of years. We decided to envelope it in a social movement and made this one of the most famous legal cases in Canadian history. So by the time the kids won, there was a real change in the Canadian population, and they were pressuring the federal government to comply. The federal government still tried to see if it could get away with messing up and not complying with those orders. But up until today, we've now got about $25 billion more services for kids and families through that litigation. And it's thanks to the collective work of everyone who came before us, everyone who was part of that movement, and the litigation together. And it's the first time we know of in the world where a government has been held to account before a legally binding body for what it's doing to kids right now, and get it to stop its discrimination and harm.
When we're looking in particular at the number of children being removed from their families and placed into out-of-home care, that it is the families that are held accountable, and yet there is no accountability attributed to the failures in the system or the failures in government to be able to provide a better environment and the resources that our families needed, or to actually even be able to reach up your hand and ask for help. So it is awesome to hear that you had success in that, and when you lay it out like that, it is absolutely transformational and inspiring. But my gut is, when you were going through that must have been really tough. What did it take in terms of resilience to go through litigation that was re-prosecuted and certainly very public? What did it take to actually stay at the table?
What was really inspiring is that the communities had said to us, look, we are going to set you up as an organization to take the hit from the Canadian government because this case has to go forward, but we're going to be there for you. And they would have community galas and fundraisers and stuff to keep us going, so that we're this very small team. We were able to continue to focus on this litigation. And then to see how the non-Indigenous kids, like you're talking about the system. We had a campaign called I Am a Witness, where we invited everyone to come and watch the case. And we put up all of Canada's court documents, all of ours, on a website. We didn't ask people to take a choice. We just said, come and watch, follow what's going on here. And one day, a group of teenagers walked in, and they said, look, we're from alternative school, which means we get into trouble a lot. And I said, so do I. And I said, I'll tell you something else. You know, getting into trouble for the wrong thing is for amateurs. I said, getting into trouble for the right thing, that takes smarts. And he said, well, sometimes we get into trouble because we do stupid stuff. Yeah. But a lot of times it's the systems you're talking about that need to be held to account, and almost no one takes them into account. Mm-hmm. but you need our help, so we're here. They not only stayed those 2 days to the amazement of their teacher, who said these kids in alternative school never stay a full day, but they came back at every hearing and they wore I Am a Witness t-shirts. By 2012, they had inspired so many other kids, including younger kids, to come to the hearings. We had to book them in shifts. And so the Canadian government would be arguing its case and turning around and seeing a sea of children and young people, most of them holding teddy bears, because we had this bear, Spirit Bear, who was our symbol of all the kids. And so they'd all bring their teddy bears to meet Spirit Bear. And that, to me, was such a message. I looked up at those kids and I thought, our kids are never going to be alone again.
Where I'm from, in Alice Springs, we often have a lot of social issues that are very obvious, right? These things are not hidden behind closed doors in Alice Springs. They're out in the open for multiple reasons and very, very complex reasons. And it was a period of time when media was smashing children, and because some of the behaviours were obvious, right? They're, again, not behind closed doors. And this particular person who was working with the children said, listen, if you show me a delinquent, I'll show you a leader. It's about being able to get to those kids and give them the purpose, because these children have the ability to make others follow. And I think that's a little bit, that's an illustration of that kind of thinking. But I think one of the other things the First Nations Caring Society is really good at is understanding how to involve children from a very early age in social justice, right? So if you're going to get in trouble for the right things. Tell us a little bit about that work, would you?
But the children really showed us that not only do they understand fairness and unfairness, that they really want to make the world a better place. Children are experts in love and fairness. In our tradition, probably very similar to yours, is children are actually the most important members of our communities. They're the most sacred and closest to the Creator. Elders are second in line because they teach the children. So we will walk into, for example, a daycare, and we aren't going to teach the local kids about the Aboriginal 101. We're going to start off by saying, hey kids, can you go home and turn on the tap and get a clean glass of water? Oh yeah. And then what do? Well, we have a big dog, we wash him, we cook with water, we have a bath, I throw water balloons at my brother, whatever. And then we say, well, imagine if you couldn't get water out of the tap. Or if the water that came out was so icky that it made you sick and it just didn't look good. Well, that wouldn't be good. And do you know that for some kids in our own country, that's what happens? Oh, that's not good at all. But the good news is, every one of us, we can help. And would you be willing to draw a picture about, why water is important for kids? And that way we can send it to the person called the Prime Minister, who can make a choice to have these other kids get clean drinking water. We can help make things better. And that kind of approach leads the kids to naturally question, well, why do these kids get less? Why is there no water on this land? They've lived on this land for thousands of years, they start to find out. They start building relationships. You want to talk to these people. They just naturally go down this place. And we have had an evaluation done just recently on our child engagement stuff. And what they found is that the kids understand the difference between social justice and charity after being involved in these campaigns. And that the First Nations kids feel really, really proud, because Spirit Bear, who's this icon back home now, he's kind of this bear that represents all of these social justice campaigns and the kids. He makes them feel proud, because he's not a bear that's recovering from all kinds of multi-generational trauma. He has that in his family, but he's there as a good bearson, and he's actually standing up for what's right. And he's bringing other kids along with him. So I think this idea of making sure you're raising kids with social justice, and you teach them to have a direct voice with people in authority. You let them know this is the person who can make a difference. And you can get them involved in politics, but just don't be partisan.
One of the things that I think we innately understand is, just by birth, we're born into a political environment as First Nations people, because there is at birth responsibilities that we are given as First Nations people, but challenges that people who aren't First Nations are never going to have to face, and that includes your ability to get your voice out and to be able to, as you say, focus on your strengths, understanding that there is absolutely a level of transgenerational trauma behind you that you have that is in your family, and these are demons that sometimes other people can't even imagine what they're like to be able to fight. But in front of you is a whole heap of possibility. If we can get you into those tracks and those pathways. And I know some of the results of your litigation, as you've spoken about, resulted in, more than $20 million more than $20 billion of investment into children's services. Can you tell us a little bit about, perhaps let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the different types of programs you deliver to children.
But we really understand that there's so many distinct, wonderful First Nations communities. And they're in the best positions to really be able to deliver the service directly to the families. What we do is we make that kind of service delivery possible with having the resources and having the resources properly structured so that actually is driven by the needs of the kids. So one of the things we have is Jordan's Principle. And Jordan's Principle is about ensuring that a First Nations child has access to the public services they need when they need them, free of any discrimination. So families can actually just apply for funding under Jordan's Principle. They can be on or off reserve. And it, as long as it relates to the needs of the child, and there's an elder or knowledge keeper who's community authorized, or a professional providing that note, and you have the guardian's permission. According to the legal orders against Canada, Canada has to fund it. So we've had about 1.3 million different types of services for kids provided, and it's things like if a parent needs like a case of formula, right, for their baby. It can be things like that, or it can be things like we've actually built fences with that money, where we've had children with autism, where it really manifested in a fascination with spinning circles, and their house was right next to a major road. So just building a 7-foot fence so they can play outside. It could be tutoring. It could be cultural activities for that child that they otherwise wouldn't get. So Jordan's Principle, we do support families in being able to access that. And then the rest of it, we really leave it to the communities to do the magic of the service delivery. And they've been doing it for many years. We've had First Nations agencies for about 50 years delivering child and family. But the type of work that they're now able to do expands into kind of having holistic youth centers with addictions treatment and mental health and wellness and culture and housing all in one hub. That's the kind of stuff we're getting off the ground now.
Just amazing. Did you ever think this was going to be possible?
No, I didn't. But I knew that we had to try. I just thought we have a duty to these kids to try. And even if we fail, we showed them that we love them enough to try, and that we're going to believe in this vision and we're going to carry through. They're not going to be having to wait and just hope that we're going to act. We are going to act. And we're going to stand in the winds of discrimination with the government, which is a scary place to be. But if we don't stand there in the winds of that discrimination, then we leave the children, youth, and families to do it on their own.
I think that might be a wonderful place to end this conversation on, a good reminder to all of us about what it takes to stand in the winds of discrimination. But before we say goodbye, I would really like to throw it back to Cindy one more time, in case there's one last message that you'd like to share with us.
We have got books, we've got animations, we have all kinds of learning guides, and there are 7 free ways to make a difference on our website. So check it out, fnCaringSociety.com. It's fnCaringSociety.com, and Spirit Bear. Just do Spirit Bear Caring Society. This bear is going to appear. And I think that, the types of activities we have there are ones that are free. They're available for children to do individually, as a group, as a family. as a community, in their school, and adults get involved with them too. So check it out and get to work.